Okay, well, welcome everyone. We're so excited to have you all here for the RIA Cost of Doing Business report overview powered by KnowHow. We're going to turn it over to our moderator for today, Phil Rosebrook, who is going to do some introductions and lead us through today's discussion. So, Phil, take it away.
Thank you, Christy. What an honor to be here, and what a really fantastic opportunity to talk about some of the real meat and potatoes of the restoration industry. And so, the first thing I'd like to discuss is this is a pretty groundbreaking report. This is the second time this has come out. And it's nice. So the first one, it's not a practice, but it's one where we get to start crafting and developing the data and information and start making sense of it. So the second one gets to be just a little bit better and more detail, more analysis. There was more companies that were participating in this. And so let's say that it's a groundbreaking report. This is really fantastic that it was peer driven. So it's restorers just like you that took the time and gave information. You could see that it was your privacy was protected in that. But through that participation, we really got some great tools and resources that were able to both convey to individual restorers how they're doing compared to everybody else. You know, you're not in this world all alone, but then also to convey to, as Leighton just a moment ago said, maybe convey to some of the stakeholders in the industry that here is the data from our industry. Here's the things that are going on. So it just gives some perspective of balance. And also with the RIA's AGA movement, the that AGA movement, this gives really some quantifiable data that the AGA then gets to use and leverage into the different resources and activities that they're working on. And so, really fantastic tool and resource. And so, this is a great opportunity to sit with some really powerful industry leaders to discuss basically how this works and how it's going to impact their business and the industry, and just give some relevance to the data that's in there because it is a weighty, meaty report. And so given that, I'd like to take a minute and just introduce our speakers and panelists today. So the first one, Christy Cohen, she is the president and the CEO of the Restoration Industry Association. Has done a really great job. I was looking through my notes. I think it was about and the face of this to the wider industry and the insurance communities as well, and all the stakeholders. So thank you for being here and talking and sharing with us your thoughts. The other individual you won't see his face on the screen right now, but Jeff Moore, Mr. Jeff Moore, is the current president of the RIA. He's going to represent the insurance or the restoration companies and the restoration perspective on this report as the president of RIA and also of ATI Restoration. So Jeff will be showing up, so you'll see his face pop in here later. And finally, I'd also like to introduce Leighton Healy. Leighton's been in the industry for 6 years as well. He is the CEO of KnowHow. And he is the driving. His company is sort of the driving force behind getting the information and then working behind the scenes to make this drive or make sense and be presented in a manner which we can all use. So, so given that, I'm ready to jump in. And so the uh, the my first thoughts here. I'm sorry, my page slipped down. So we'll start with a question directly to Christy. And Christy, please tell me why the RIA launched this report and what was the gap we were trying to fill? So what was the driving purpose behind all of this?
Absolutely. So the RIA launched the Cost of Doing Business report powered by KnowHow to really fill a critical gap in our industry, the need for reliable restoration-specific financial data. Generic financial benchmarks, they just simply don't reflect the nuance and the realities that restoration companies are facing. And this report is really designed not just to give data and information, but we want this to be a practical tool that restorers can utilize to assess their financial health, to improve efficiency, and to make data-driven decisions. It's really intended to go beyond just kind of those surface level numbers and really help restorers answer some real everyday business questions. When we have our conversations with our advocacy and government affairs committees and our focus groups with restorers, we know there are key questions that are top of mind to folks. Things like, what impact does TPA work have on margins? Is commercial work necessary to scale and grow my company? Things like what is the overhead reality for restorers and how does that compare to the insurance industry's 10 and 10 model? Things like, do I have the right staffing ratios to support growth in the right ways? So these are all the kinds of questions that restoration leaders are asking, and we wanted to give you all a report that gives data to help you find meaningful answers for your own companies. And I just want to extend our gratitude to all of the companies that contributed to this year's survey, because really it's an important tool, not just for the restorers who are going to utilize this information, but it's a critical tool for RIA's advocacy work, which we're going to talk a little bit later on here today with the webinar. So thank you for everyone who participated. We need as much participation as we can get every year so that we can really tell the story of what those financial realities are for our restorers and communicate that across the restoration ecosystem.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I think that as people get to see this information and know how it's used, I really hope that it becomes a motivation for, hey, you know what, I'm gonna make it better next year. And so we'll have more participation. And I'm sure that was a realization this year as well. So, and given that, Leighton, would you just express what measures were taken to ensure the data was accurately reflects the restoration companies of all different sizes?
If you are flipping through the report and you ask yourself, is this a good benchmark for my company? My company's doing, say, under 5 million, or my company's doing 55 million or whatnot. Well, we spent a lot of time thinking about how do we make sure that this is a report for every restorer in the industry. And so a few things that I'll surface. One is eh, this has been a full village effort to promote participation in this survey. Vendors in the industry, franchise partners in the industry, the restoration industry associations, all the many volunteers, and so many of the media partners have helped to kind of push this out to get as many eyeballs as possible, and that led to a large cohort of restorers participated anonymously, and I'm happy to report that not only did we have a nice broad spectrum of, let's call it, revenue bracket based participation, but also regional representation. So we have kind of full regional representation in the report, both Canada and the United States. And then within a lot of the analysis work, we really avoid a lot of kind of averages, which averages can be thrown off by large players in the industry, or say a real outlier, kind of a smaller revenue bracket. So we really aim for medium kind of median based analysis in a lot of the report, which in a sense I think really accounts for some large whale that splashes the pool and kind of throws off the data. So I would say if you looked at the hands and feet that really shook the bushes to kind of get folks to participate, you look at just the volume of participation and just raw data, and then just the fact that the way we do our analysis accounts for trying to create kind of a middle ground representation of the statistics and the data. I think that anybody of any size can look at this report and walk away with some very relevant insight for their business.
Yeah, and one of the things I like about it is that it does break in almost each one of the key metrics into the various size of companies, from the small players to the really large players. And so if you're reading this report and you're a $15 million company, you can see where your cohort fits. And so I think that's really fantastic, because if I'm a $500,000 person and I'm trying to compare myself to a $20 million company, it's not going to make sense. And so the way it's laid out is really fantastic. And so a great job with that. Uh, so leveraging to this is the second year of the report. Did you find any data in this second report surprising? And if you did, what really stood out on that your findings there? We'll start that with maybe Leighton.
Well, you know, I can only offer just like a bit of a there's so many things that jump out at me, and I would just encourage everyone, like we're talking nearly 80 pages of information here. So let me just give you some of the nuggets. I mean, the change in terms of the average job size, I think, is really going to impact the way that sales leaders are going to be forecasting next year. Companies, really, when you look at not only the profitability of different kind of average job sizes on recon and mid-work, it's really interesting to see, smaller jobs becoming more profitable. I think there's a correlation between a rise of direct customer pay work and, you're starting to see these surging deductible levels and kind of how that's creating businesses who truly are going to have to become, businesses who know how to create really accelerated cycle time, really fast processing administrative teams. And so just the shrinking average job size and what we're seeing in terms of the profitability rates in kind of larger mid and larger recon jobs, I think is really eyebrow raising in terms of how sales teams. I think what sales rep doesn't want to bring in some big massive project, but again, just really careful about the profitability levels. We're obviously, as an AI software vendor, we're always interested in how restorers think about their software mix. 2% average restore spending on software. And I think that when you compare that to other industries, that is again, it sounds like a sales guy here, but a surprisingly low resourcing towards what can be very a transformational part of the business. Also I find it very interesting to see what's happening within the large players, the 50 million plus. Um, I probably wouldn't get a lot of participation if I started handing out T-shirts that said "Hug a 50 million plus revenue restore," because I'll tell you, based on the data, those folks are pretty stressed out right now. When you look at overhead levels, you look at how they're having to capitalize things, you look at kind of their AR levels, you look at just cash on hand. Again, we for a healthy ecosystem, you need to have healthy large players, and there's some real strain being experienced at that higher level rate across the industry. But again, that's something that I think we have to really give a lot of consideration to. And hey, I called it out earlier. There's still a lot of restorers who have just not got on the wagon of aligning a component of compensation to really driving alignment within their workforce, variable compensation. Still 13% of the industry is reluctant to offer any type of variable compensation in the industry. I thought that number would improve. And but I'm also encouraged. We've all probably heard someone say that the way that you kind of plan your business is 250 per every van you're on the out on the road, 250,000 revenue. And this is one of the first years where we've really looked at like what kind of revenue per head count. I think in kind of an AI enhanced workforce world, average revenue per head count, labor yield is going to be kind of a top KPI, and so starting to track that, really encouraged by companies under 10 staff averaging 339,000 average revenue per employee, and then interestingly companies 50 to 99 staff averaging just under $300,000 per head count. I mean, those are really healthy numbers. And I think that's a really exciting base to start from. So many other things that I'd love to dig into, but that's just a sampling of some of the things that I thought were surprising in the data this year.
Fantastic. So, speaking of large contractors that we all need to give a hug to, Mr. Jeff Moore, I want to welcome you to the screen, and I'm going to toss it to Christy first, so you know exactly where we are in the presentation, and then you can come back in. I'd love to hear your thoughts. But Christy, anything that stood out to you in this report, and maybe something that you found surprising as you dug into the numbers.
Yeah, so I mean, some of the headlines that I took away from this year's report, one of which was that the majority of respondents were not leaning on TPA sourced work as their primary source of revenue. Our survey respondents, 53% of those companies reported zero revenue from TPAs, which was up from 45% from last year. And survey respondents in the $5 to $10 million range appeared to be operating TPA free. So this could, be for several reasons. Companies might be diversifying their lead sources because they're trying to avoid over reliance on one single referral channel. TPA lead volumes may have declined somewhat in 24. Some contractors may have been moved off of TPA programs, and others have just invested in more alternative marketing strategies. So that was one of the headlines around TPA that was interesting. And then, looking, of course, at the average time to get paid. Unfortunately, this is still one of the top pain points we're aware of, across the industry. And we understand that, this continues to be a challenge. So in this year's survey, our respondents with less than $1 million in gross revenue reported payment times of around 46 days, while companies in that $10 to $15 million bracket reported around 91 days. Our mid-size folks between that $1 and $10 million range, they were reporting average time to get paid of around 60 days. So across the board, we know these numbers are much higher than most restoration companies are comfortable with. It's leading to extreme cash flow issues for companies of all sizes. So this continues to be at the forefront of RIA's mind when it comes to advocacy and, how restorers are looking at their accounts receivable process, their customer onboarding. Because I think if these long drawn out payment timelines continue to be the norm, it's going to be more likely that restorers are beginning to prioritize that private pay work.
Yeah, very, very fascinating findings there. Mr. President Jeff Moore, welcome your thoughts on just surprising things you found from the report and any differences between last year and this year, but with the general subject matter of something you found particularly interesting or surprising. Yeah, I think you're muted. Can't hear you talking.
How about now?
Better. Yep,
All right.
perfect.
Yeah, so for me, I'm a big picture thinker, so I'm putting myself in an owner's shoes here. And so for me, the headline is always going to come down to the 10% net income that you guys have on the screen here. So I think that a couple things that really stood out to me, that is the benchmark. At the end of the day, us as restorers, we talk a lot about gross margins, gross profit margins, mitigation margins. You hear margins from, as you see in the report, of 90% all the way down to single digits. But at the end of the day, we as restorers are all putting things in various buckets. One person puts a project manager above the line, one puts them below the line. So gross margins, I think they're directionally correct, but I think at the end of the day, what kind of profit you're making is really important. So I think that is the ultimate benchmark to see if you're a healthy organization, and really looking at the study of what your mix is. If you're looking to drive more net profit, you really need to look at your business. But I'd say one of the most alarming things is there was 7% of restorers are actually losing money. No one got into this business to set up a business to where they're paying to keep a business open. So there's something unhealthy in the organization. And I think there's lots of avenues that you can pull from this report to make sure you're running a healthy organization. 10% is definitely a healthy net income, but you're one job away, you're one bad employee away from potentially going into the red. And that's not why any of us are doing this. We're here to serve customers, but at the end of the day, we want to make a buck as well. And I think the misnomer when we talk about, or even insurance companies talking about making 60, 70% gross margin, that doesn't factor in your overhead. And when you tell someone your net income is 8, 9, or 10%, all of a sudden that 78% margin on a water mitigation doesn't sound as sexy as it did when you left that as a standalone. So I think we got, pull back the curtain and really look at what you're making, because that is the ultimate benchmark, in my opinion.
And Jeff, to add on to that and talking about overhead, just one other call out there, we did see an increase in overhead compared to last year's survey respondents. So last year, folks were reporting about a 36%. That jumped up to over 38% this year. So, just something else to keep in mind in terms of the squeeze that's on our restorers. The reported average for overhead labor as a percentage of total expenses this year's survey was over 52%. So a lot of data there to dig into around that labor comparison and just seeing that overhead continuing to trend upward.
And to build on what Christy and Jeff are saying, I just think about, a restorer, walking into a doctor's, office and saying, I'm feeling a little tension. I'm feeling a little stressed right now. I feel like I just I've run out of Tums and I don't know what else to do, And they say, well, tell me what's going on. And it's like, well, labor costs are rising. I can't charge more. It takes me, forever to get paid, and my debt is way out of control. My AR is taking for. I mean, again, they're like, again, you do all of that, all that diagnosis work, and it really comes together in towards Jeff's comment around, incentives. I mean, healthy economies are driven by balanced and reasonable incentives, and we have to find as an industry a way to be able to rebalance the incentives for restorers to just continue to have a thriving, kind of customer service focused industry. um, to Christie's point, yeah, you're seeing this overhead level rise, and yet you're not really seeing a lot of improvement in time to payment, and you're also seeing not necessarily, a spike in gross margins, meaning that our top line is just really really growing, in nice healthy correlation to our OPEX costs, and it all amounts to a lot of strain. And I'm hoping that this report really helps restorers to be able to sit across the table from some of their partners and to be able to say, look, like I'm not the only squeaky wheel. Like, this is a representation of my peers. This is what we're up against, right? Like, you have to work with me here, right? At the end of the day, this is a three-legged stool. We need to be able to have everybody involved. Everyone has to feel like there's a win for them, or ultimately, you don't really have a balanced market. So I see that as well.
A couple of things to comment on that. So the first one is there, for the few companies that are operating between 0 and 5%, which there's fewer this year than last year, which is good. But those companies I always find are statistically kind of on life support, because you just can't get ahead of the cash flow. You look at your accounts receivable days and you have a low profit margin. There's no hope to be cash positive in a company like that. And so you've got all sorts of capital requirements and resources and lending and things you need to do that put your company in a position of risk, especially in a time where costs are going up because we have these inflation challenges, which are real. And that's driving up all of the overhead costs, which aren't, we always think about, well, we're making our margin on our job site, but then we don't pay attention to the administrative staff, my marketing staff, my estimators, my project managers, all those other things, where the cost of inflation is so high in the world outside of our restoration industry that there's this demand for some higher wages. And so it makes for uncomfortable positions where we're trying to preserve that net profit margin at the end of the day. So I have a question here to the RIA staff and Nicole here. I think we're soliciting questions from our attendees. And so at this point, I do want to just announce that if you have questions and you're watching and you wanted to talk specifically, we're looking at questions with profitability or report usability for this report. If there's others, we'll screen through them, but those would be kind of the topics and topical things we're looking for. So if anybody wants to put those in, and I believe that Nicole and the team there, the RIA team, are screening through those, and you may have the opportunity to get your question answered here during this session. So let's see where I am here. The next question here, and aim this one at Jeff and Leighton. So how can contractors use these benchmarks to evaluate their business and start meaningful conversations with their teams?
I'll take that one first. So okay. I think at the end of the report and the cost of doing business in each section, there's follow-up questions. So the one thing I would warn you, I've done this and failed myself in my own business. This data shouldn't just be yours. And if it's just yours, you're not going to grow. You're not going to evolve. I would encourage all of you. I don't care if you're an owner with 3 employees. loop your team in. At the end of the day, there's only so much that I can do that you can do in your business. And so regardless of whether you're the largest restoration company or you literally started last week, take this data and ask the questions. We as owners don't always know the solutions. The frontline employees actually know a lot of what's going on in our business, and they can see it from a different perspective than you can as an owner. But if you're just going to sit on this and share it with your spouse, your sibling, maybe your other owner, and not with your manager or your estimator, then you're doing yourself a disservice. There is stuff to learn in this report. A lot of people spend a lot of time, and I highly recommend you go through the exercise of asking those questions. You want to be collaborative. You don't want to be a dictator. It's not just your business. You may be the owner, but in order to institute change, grow, and be relevant, this is not my dad's restoration industry that it was 10 years ago. We are changing really quickly, and there's a lot of amazing data, and this has never been out there before. So I highly encourage you share everything with your staff that's obviously relevant to your organization.
And just to build on what Jeff's saying, if I was to just, in a sense, give a restorer like just a kind of a 3-part plan to leverage this into their team and, in a sense, really drive, I think, just some really transformational conversations. Number one is that if you have become accustomed to kind of guarding a lot of those let's call it financial benchmarks in your business, and that's just kind of data points that are just kind of held within just a small contingent of your team. I don't think that step one is, tell everyone how much cash is in the bank. I think step one is, does your team have a clear line of sight on what some of these percentages are, both at the job level and both at the kind of the overall kind of running totals, whether it's something that you follow on an annual basis or something that you follow on a job by job basis. But for you to be able to sit down in a room with your team and work through the questions that Jeff's describing that are found at the end of each section, those questions I think are going to be fruitful regardless of how much, let's call it, company context that you bring to the table. But if you are able to sit down with a member of your team who's got a clear line of sight on the numbers, and to be able to go through the report and just identify, what are those 5 or 6 kind of relevant numbers in our business today? What are our numbers today? And perhaps what were they this time last year? And then to be able to sit down in the group with your group of people in your team and say, this is the benchmark data. This is the cohorts we fall into. These are the averages in those cohorts that are relevant to us. These are our current numbers, and let's have a conversation. How do we feel about those numbers? And so if you can actually have those numbers, distribute this report to your team. It's October 20, what is it today? October 23rd, break it up a little bit. There's 3 sections, perhaps it could be 3 kind of, lunch and learn sections, jump into each top. And I think that there's a lot of meat on the bone. So giving your team the task of saying, hey, how can we identify, a couple 1%, needle movers? Like where can we move things 1-2% in the right direction? I think that those would be some transformational conversations to have before you step into 2026. And I think you could get a lot of excitement with your team. I think that type of knowledge is very empowering for your team. And sometimes when you run your business in isolation from others, you don't always know kind of, what are the numbers? What are the running mates? What are some numbers we can chase? What's kind of are we moving in the right direction? And these benchmark metrics also give you a sense of, are you exceeding or are you falling behind? But I think there's some really transformational conversations waiting for your team.
I've got a tangible example I'd like to share. So one of the things my business is chasing is we want to convert more mitigation jobs into repairs. And so that's been an initiative. If you look at the report, you can see, I think I can represent all restorers that do mitigation. We all want to do more mitigation. You make more money. But if you're not sharing that with your team, and I'll give you an example. So as an executive team, we've been pushing this in the organization. Earlier this week, I was in our Phoenix office talking to some of our staff, and I asked them how it's going. And one of them, who's been with us for like 15 years, he's like, boss man, I don't know how to, like, when I go out and do a mitigation job or an emergency service job, like I just fill out on the work authorization, like, authorize us to do like water mitigation services. This person, again, been with us a long time, shame on us. He's like, Jeff, I was under the impression because we can't sign the MIT and the repairers. And I found out that our whole mitigation team wasn't even asking the customer if they wanted us to do everything. We live in a today's age where we want everything to be easy. Why wouldn't the customer want to sign the job at the time that they're signing the mitigation? And so something simple like that, bringing this to your team, I think everyone's going to agree. We want to do more mitigation work. How do we do it? Well, I have to empower the guys and the gals that are on the field actually doing the mitigation work, the supervisors doing the work, dealing with Mrs. Smith or Mr. Jones, whoever the insured happens to be. And so something simple like that, we all want more MIT. We want to make better margins. But ultimately, if we get the water damage, I don't want to lose that repair job to someone else. Like those are the slam dunks. Like don't lose the revenue in front of you. And I think that's a real tangible thing I pulled away from this report, and we've certainly been using in our business.
And grab your admin teams, pull them together and say, hey, this is how long it takes the average team our size to close a job to get paid. What's ours? It's probably not a stretch to say that if you just asked every one of your staff, it's probably unlikely that staff actually know. Like how I don't know how long it takes to get paid. I do my job. I hand the work over to the admin, and I don't know when we get paid. And to be able to, said in a sense, that's the North Star, and how can we actually be above average? How can we lead the pack? How can we truly be, kind of a standout leader? Set a number. And man, I'll tell you, when you start tracking something, and your team gets excited about that, it's amazing how quickly staff can start to knock down, days, even weeks on cycle time.
One of the things I liked, there was a book Rachel Stewart, one of our colleagues in the industry, wrote, and really good. And there she had this theory of if you can do it, I can do it. And that was kind of that thought. And if you look out there and say, okay, if another company is doing something better than you, there's a way to make it happen. And so, I'll use an example of the days to collection, days on sales. It's way too long. But not for everybody. There's some companies that are cutting the average industry time in half. What are they doing? And what is the difference between that company and our company internally? There's process, system, structures. There's asking questions. There's ways to try to drive and make those things better. And so sometimes it's, okay, this is a reality. Somebody's doing it. How are they doing it? Let's put some systems in place. Let's figure it out. And let's track our performance. And then maybe go back to that compensation, the virtual compensation that Leighton was talking about, and reward the performance that gets us to where we want to be. So I had a question here for Christy, and I'd just like to know, so this is a really comprehensive report, really valuable. And what is the thought behind the RIA and the direction they make, and what's the credibility for the report, and then the way you utilize this to improve maybe our world for the restoration contractor?
Yeah, so the whole impetus for having this report was really our discussions with restorers around key pain points. All of our conversations, regarding advocacy, how long it's taking folks to get paid, the challenges of rising overhead costs, the disconnect between reality and the insurance industry 10 and 10 model. We knew restorers were experiencing these challenges, but we just did not have a good mechanism for demonstrating all of this through data. And so that was why we implemented this report in partnership with KnowHow, because it's really critical. It's prior to this, we had a lot of powerful stories from members in the field. They were compelling, but without the data, those things can be dismissed by decision makers in the ecosystem. And so really, thanks to this report, now we have real anonymized financial and operational data from restoration companies across North America. And this data is going to give us the credible information to support what contractors have been saying all along. Labor and overhead costs are rising faster than pricing software models are often reflecting. Payment delays are real and hurting restorers. Many restorers are operating on unsustainable margins. So now we have data that we can take into these conversations. We're currently engaged in advocacy across several different efforts. Some of the key areas that, where this cost of doing business data really comes into play is the advocacy that we're doing with pricing software data vendors to promote making sure that data actually reflects market realities, making sure that it's understood that there are needs for us to be able to deviate from those pricing data dependent upon particular project scenarios and things of that nature. Advocating for prompt payment is another issue that we are working on. We've issued a prompt payment position statement for Canada. We're working with our carrier representation task force on some of these key issues, and also securing fair treatment for contractors when it comes to insurance-driven programs, and working with TPAs through our TPA scorecard, and now engaging in conversations where TPAs are saying, what can we do to be better partners with restorers? So all of this data is so critical for us to take into those conversations. And that's why it's just so important that everyone participate in the surveys each year, because it's going to enable us to have that credibility going into the conversations and saying, here's the data to back up what we see happening in the industry.
Leighton, do you have any ideas or comments just from a structural process or part in how RIA can or should use this, or how a local contractor can take this data or use it in a conversation with maybe it's a stakeholder or it's an adjuster or a property manager?
Well, I'll go back to something that Jeff said. He talked about the profitability rates and how there is a cohort within the industry where they're still in that sub 10%, or for some they're not reporting even a positive net income. I mean, I think that's where it starts right now. If your business isn't profitable and you're really concerned about your ability to be able to keep your head above water, I don't think that you're that. I just don't think it's hard for you to be really vigilant on a lot of the let's call it those broader macro activities. And so I just really I hope that this report. I'll just speak as I'm a vendor in the industry, right? And I hope that this report will be embraced by vendors, and that they'll come to contractors empathetically and say, hey, you know what? Like let us come alongside your team and even show you how we can better leverage our tools, our products, our services, anything that's going to, in a sense, lock arms with the some of these restorers who I think as Fern Harnish would say, if you're under 10%, you're kind of in the crisis zone. And so how do we, in a sense, really give those individuals a solid foundation? And then I think beyond that, once I think that they're in a position where they're not on life support and they're truly, you have all participants in this market are, generating, I think, a healthy profit. I mean, no question, a report like this, number one, inform your team, inform your team so that they can speak confidently. I think we can all agree business owners aren't the only ones having those conversations with representatives of various organizations and various insurance carriers and whatnot. And so make sure your team can speak to these numbers and can speak to these numbers confidently. I think number two is I think it's really important for you to be able to use the data in this report to find to fill your comments, to find which cohorts you belong to based on revenue size, to get those averages up on the whiteboard, put your current numbers beside those numbers, and really understand where do we stand? Like, where do we stand based on averages? And now that we have some insight into that, what do we want to do with those numbers? And then beyond that, to Jeff's point, I think it's really important that this isn't a report that just dies in your inbox, dies in your desk. It's a meaty report, and I read it on the flight into where I am today, and working through over 70 pages of information takes some time. And I would just encourage you to don't make that a take-home homework assignment. Make it possible for your team on paid time to be able to add a paper, in hand, work through the report, and just make it deliverable to say, I'd love for you to take a couple hours and work through this report, and I would love for you just to come to this conversation with one or two things that jumped out at you that you think hold opportunity for us to be a better company. Those are things that are top of mind for me, Phil.
That's fantastic. I think the follow-up part of that as well, not just look at it once, but then come back and let's revisit those thoughts down the road next quarter or some point. So we say that we're becoming actionable, doing something with that data and with the information that we have. Jeff, I'm going to have you ask you kind of as a follow-up or a final question here on your hat, not as the contractor, but as the president of Restoration Industry Association. So this report, how do you hope or expect that collectively we're utilizing the resources here and perhaps elevating the RIA, or at least the RIA as an advocate or tool or resource for the contractors themselves?
So I think as an industry, we're at a crux. I think when you look at, over half the industry making less than 10% net income, we have to ask ourselves, we are a vital part of this. Again, whether you want to call it 100 or $250 billion industry, it's a big freaking industry. And a lot of people rely on us. We have to stay relevant. We have to make profit in order to sustain this industry. We are a vital part of this ecosystem, and we have to continue use this report, use it strategically. There's a misnomer, and we all talk about gross profit margins. The insurance companies think we're making more money than them. We make less money than most vendors. We make less net income than insurance carriers and independent adjusters and TPAs. So it's really important. Use this. Next time you're negotiating with an adjuster or a homeowner, there's a misnomer out there that we're making money hand over fist because they hear 70% gross margin. Keep that in mind. We need to fight for every line item, document, document, document. But for us to be relevant and be around and not get lost in the general construction industry, we've got to be more financially viable. Use these tools, diversify your business offering. But at the end of the day, 10%, you are literally one lawsuit. You're one employee complaint away from going out of business. And that's not a sustainable business model for you individually, for your region, or for this industry. And we have to figure out a way to make more money to be a viable industry. And that is what we're really fighting for, is to be recognized by our government. But also, we want to be an industry that people want to get into. And quite honestly, there's a lot of industries I could go out and invest in. And if you could do it all over again, would you invest in an industry where the average restorer is making 8 to 9% net income? I don't know that a lot of people want to jump in that industry. It's a growing industry. It's an amazing industry, but we have to change the way that we operate our businesses.
Excellent points. So I don't know who is, are we screening some questions from the audience here? And do we
Yes.
have some direction here?
I was just going to say, we have a couple of questions in the queue. If anyone has a question, please type your question into the chat box. A question for Jeff, I think you've kind of touched on this, and Phil as well. While the RIA does not, certainly dictate or tell people what their numbers should be, right? Every company has to decide what their financial benchmarks are. Um, we talked about 10%. What profit percentage from your perspectives kind of is that baseline where we're starting to get into the danger zone? That we need to be making sure we're kind of above that level just from your own experiences.
So I can speak for my business, and obviously I look at a lot of other businesses. I would say if you're running at 5% or less, you're in the danger zone. I would say, again, 10% is the average. I would say a healthy organization's 15%. I think as you get bigger, that number gets harder. But if you're running in single digits, and the closer you get to 5%, it's a tough road, and you are in the danger zone as you're pushing closer to 5%, and you need to ask for outside help. But yeah, the magic number is 10 is healthy, but you're not above average, or you're just average at that point. But I think 15 to 20% is really what you're aiming for, and 5%, there's something wrong in the business. You're doing something wrong, or you're running the business and your diversification of services is off.
And another question that came through is, how has the influx of private equity in the industry potentially affected the OH for all restorers, because they are, being paid higher dollars for talent from other companies, which maybe is increasing overhead. So how has PE potentially affected the market? Is there kind of a good path forward for those restorers within that $1 to $10 million range to find great talent and improve profitability?
I don't know that. I don't know that. I think private equity has definitely driven up overhead a little bit, but not a lot. Again, a big company requires more overhead, so there's more dollars to be paid. So again, it's all in how you allocate. It's all in how you reward your employees. I would ask you to look at how you're compensating your most talented employees, because I would say, speaking for ATI, there are local restoration companies that pay better than we do locally. So you can be competitive and compete with the guys. Remember, we have a lot of debt. So we've got a lot bigger overhead once you factor in the debt, which most small businesses don't have the debt load that a PE company does.
Thank you, Jeff.
And
And then, oh, go
And
ahead.
if I could just add one point to that is, the specifically, whoever asked that question is a great question. And I would just direct you, page 56 in the report really talks about, L&D spend, and specifically, talking about that bracket that they find themselves in. I think, Christy, that you said they're kind of in that 10 million plus bracket. I think there was, maybe that was just something Jeff mentioned on. But the great question is, are companies, in a sense, buying or building their talent? Are they in a sense looking out to market, recognizing that perhaps in their region or in their market, they think that there are macro factors that are driving up the cost of certain roles? Likely, maybe yes, maybe no. But interestingly enough, one of the things that we track in the data is what are the average per headcount spend per year on learning and development. And it might surprise you with some organizations, in terms of different size cohorts, in terms of what they spend on average per year. And obviously there's some questions that a person could raise in terms of, how are you classifying L&D investment in your team and whatnot. But fundamentally, I think that what we're seeing is, especially in that $5 to $10 million range company, you're seeing a broad, I would say, investment in, we need to be companies that can build the talent that we need to be able to operate in this space. And so I think that's really exciting. So again, I just direct your eyes to whoever asked that question to page 56 of the report, and that whole kind of world around. I think there's just two really interesting components around, how companies are investing at an average per head count L&D spend, and then average revenue per head count. And what are the correlated? What's the correlation between those 2 points? I think that'd be worth some discussion within your team.
And also, I see that Pete Consigli has his hand raised. So, Pete, if you want to come off of mute.
Oh man, be careful.
So I try to put something in the chat and it says it's disabled, but I got two things that I just want to say. Number one, I want to thank KnowHow and Jeff and Phil and everybody for putting this together. And I know there's got a couple more coming down the pike, but something I learned very early in my career, maybe this ties into what Jeff said, profit is not a dirty word. And you need it to run a business. You need it to run an association. The difference, I guess, between the association profit and a business profit is how the money is spent, in order to be tax exempt. But it's not a dirty word, and we need to make that profit. One of the things I'm doing right this minute is I'm uploading to my LinkedIn page the Golden Quill Award winner in CNR magazine from 2012 that addressed the issue of overhead and profit. It was written by Tracy Bachtel, who he's retired now, but he was a general adjuster for years, and he also was business development for Paul Davis Restoration. And that paper was reviewed by all the senior management. It's an excellent document, and maybe it's time that a lot of our members who weren't around and don't recall it go review that document, and it'll give them really valuable insights that will tie into this whole cost of doing business from the perspective of one of the major networks in the industry. So thank you for the opportunity. I really enjoyed the webinar, and thank you. I'll turn it back to Mr. Moderator, there, Phil Jr.
Perfect. Thank you, Pete. Appreciate that. Great input and great insights. In this session, we didn't get into the overhead discussion a lot, but that is coming up later. I've seen the ideas for the next two sessions coming up, so we will get into that. And I know that is a very relevant, real question to a lot of people. So, any other questions there, Christy, that we need to address here?
No other questions, but I do want to just remind everyone, if you have not downloaded the report, costofrestoration.com is where you can download the report. There's additional graphics and resources. We have throughout the report QR codes for some great RIA resources, position statements, some know-how resources that can be very helpful to your organization. So please be sure to take advantage of those. And I do see that we have one additional question. This just came through from Watley. What can restorers do to win the AI race? Carriers and restorers are striving to extract value from AI solutions. So I don't know if anyone here would like to jump on that question for Watley or take a stab at that. We are actually, as an RIA organization, we have a lot of work that we're doing around our tech task force and this exact issue, but any comments from the panel on that?
Well, I know I have a lot of thoughts on this as an AI vendor.
Yeah.
But if I was to just, in a sense, try to take off that hat and just go back to, I've spent more of my time, I've spent more time being a contractor and building service companies and expanding, service networks than I have building AI technology. And so I know what it's like to really feel the squeeze of so many of the factors that contractors are experiencing as reflected in this report. And so I think broadly speaking is that if AI is still kind of a bit of an anomaly or just kind of just a conversation that's not really brought up within your workforce, um, I would encourage you to use this report as an opportunity to be very transparent with your team, to be able to share what are some of those kind of top line numbers, top line percentages. Maybe you're just comfortable with percentages with your team, and to be able to then benchmark them against those numbers within your cohorts, and then to be able to set some targets for 2026 around what do you want those North Star metrics to be? Whether it's gross margin, whether it's your bottom line profit, whether it's your cycle time on getting paid, whether it's your AR levels, whatever it is, and then to be able to say, look, there's a lot of AI stuff out there. Let's find AI vendors that can help us do that to cross the gap on those. I mean, the average contractor in this industry who's doing probably, I would say, probably under $3 million, even under $1 million, that individual is, they are so in the mix that any type of administrative efficiencies that they can unlock in the areas of, billing, invoicing, accounts receivable, anything to streamline that is I think is going to be a real game changer. But at the end of the day, that takes time. That takes time, and I really think that when you want to win the AI race, I think that you have to narrow your team into two or three things that you really want to move the needle on in your business. I think that you want to be very upfront with vendors and say, look, I'm sure you got a whole bunch of bells and whistles there, but my team, we've decided we want to move these three numbers this year. And if you think you can help us move those numbers, let's talk. But if that's not your jam, if you're more over here, then you know what? Not a necessary conversation for us right now. And so I don't think you have to have all the answers about AI. I don't think you have to read everything about AI, but I do think that you need to be able to know, what your pain points are. I think your staff need to know what those pain points are. I think you have to, come together around what we want those numbers to look like 12 months from now, and then to be able to just be very comfortable sharing those numbers broadly with your team, with your vendors, with that person who's trying to get 15 minutes with you in your inbox, and and bring everyone into alignment around how can we move the needle on these things. I mean, AI is a transformational tool. It's not a trend. It's not a gadget. It is coming to a job site near you, and I get to be front and center of eyebrow raising optimizations and improvements that I see in our customers' businesses. But fundamentally, I think that the big opportunity is right in front of us in this report. Is we have to find a way, to be able to reduce some of the operational burden so that these business owners can focus on sales, can focus on, really resourcing their team so that the average person can generate more revenue dollars per person, and that there's more yield there. And if I could snap my fingers and give every restorer one Christmas present, it would be time. I would just love to give every restorer more time so they can read this stuff, they can think about it, they can synthesize it. Heck, they can take their kids, for a vacation, so that they can have that moment of peace, so they can think about what do all these what do all these data points mean for me. And I think AI can give you time. Um, it's not going to run your business. It's not going to replace your staff, but I think it can give you time. And restorers need time to be able to think about what does all this data mean for me and my business.
I'm waiting for that time stretching AI app. But I would just say, just leave it to Watley to drop a our conversation at 9:50 or at 10:53 here. So good job, Watley. Appreciate it. I know we're not going to get into too much of that. I'm going to do a plug because RIA is with the AI stuff. There's some people doing some really, really fantastic stuff with that, and networking with your peers and understanding how to leverage that in your business is going to be really important. So my suggestion is the RIA convention is coming up in Savannah in the spring, and show up with the purpose of, I'm going to go find people who maybe have the best metrics in this report here, or that are doing something really cool with AI. But I'm going to say that you got to be cautious, because all of that stuff can become a rabbit hole and can get in the way of your business and serving the client. And so figure out what really works well, be strategic about it, and then go find people who are doing it well, and see what parts of that you can model in your business and how you can make that better. So that's my 2 cents on the AI part of it, but also knowing that we've got other resources out there. There's people doing it really, really well, and I'm massively impressed when I hear that. So do we have any final questions, Christy? If not, I'm going to do a wrap.
No, we do not.
Okay, so I just want to thank everybody for tuning in today to be a part of this. I download the report. I've read through it. I think I started reading in July, and so part of the peer review committee. I've read through the report probably 5 or 6 times, and each time I do that, I pick out something new. And so there's so much in there that becomes not only just to have data and information on what's going on in the industry, but how does it compare to what I'm doing in my business? How can I leverage that into doing things a little bit smarter, a little bit better, and really focusing on the numbers in not only the industry, but the numbers in my business, and making sure, first of all, they're accurate, they're timely, and then I can then leverage them to make my business better. And so that's what this report can do. That's how you can utilize this resource. I do really love the questions that are suggested at the end of each one of these sections or chapters in the book. You'll see, when you get the report, you'll see it. It'll make sense. You're like, oh, that's the questions. And then you can use those to start digging a little bit deeper, or maybe formulating your own questions within it. Be strategic with this plan. Be strategic with your company, and then you can leverage this. And this is a great resource. Thank you, RIA, for sponsoring it. Thank you for KnowHow for bringing the knowledge and technology together to create this great resource and report. And Jeff for being present most of the time. And I appreciate it, because I know he had big emergencies in his business, and it was nice that he was able to show up for as much time as he did and was here today. So with that, thank you all very much. And I believe whoever's the behind the scenes will wrap it up for us. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day.